Announce. Okay, we're live again. Thank you, Spectrum, Time Warner, for dropping the signal once again.
Well, never mind, we're back in the game, I believe.
Yep, we are back in the game. I'm going to wait and see if I can bring Mr. Don back, because this is just fascinating stuff.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Loving this. Okay. So, we've been talking today to
Don Stinson, and about his book, Downstairs at the White House, where he was an intern at the age of 17. And we had some communication difficulties then. I was just about to ask you, Don, did you ever speak to either of the presidents, Nixon or Ford?
Okay, please. Well, we haven't got him on, so he can't answer the question.
Okay.
So I'm going to go back on Martin's Facebook. I'm going to find Dawn. Tell the kids what else has been going on with... Hi, Rick Lothers. Hi, everybody's
Hello,
back.
folks.
That's great.
I'm sorry we're having a little communication problem at the moment. Well, we're working on it.
No.
Don has got some amazing stories, and a lot of them you can read in this terrific book, which you can get on Amazon. It's called Downstairs at the White House. And I'm sure it's very popular again right now because of all the, interest there is in all things with political going on. And Don was my boss, actually, when I worked for Gannett Newspapers. And after the earthquake in Los Angeles, I was transferred from USA Today to Nashville, where I worked for the Tennessean, and Don was the big boss there. And I never thought we'd be on a basis like we are now, on friendship and Facebook and emailing each other. And of course, I have loved reading his book, which I'm about to read again, because it's one of those books you go back and think, oh, I need to read that again, because it's such fun and so informative when you realize it was somebody that actually was there on the scene,
Camilla Deacon is watching from LA. Oh, good. And Don is back, so I'm going to
good.
bring him on camera.
Until you could come back. Don,
It says adding. Hold on, I'll tell you when he's here. It says adding. And
I'm back.
Yay! Part 2.
Welcome home.
I am so sorry. I just have the worst luck with this stuff.
I know we do, don't we? Maybe it's when we say White House.
So I just kept talking,
So
which is characteristic, as you know.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard any of it or not. But.
where we were was Ange was asking you, did you ever get to speak to any of the presidents?
Yes, several different times. One in particular with President Nixon. What I used to do in the morning, they should have never given a kid my age a pass and access to so much of the White House without, having somebody to control me. And I used to walk in the morning through the West Wing that you see on television, and I would go out into the colonnade that's adjacent to the Rose Garden. And I'd try to time it so that I would walk by President Nixon, who usually went in around 8:30 or so. And believe me, in those days, it was so much different because I had a briefcase that I carried with me every day that had my schoolwork in it. And I carried it in and no one ever checked me. And I would walk right past the President of the United States with it. But anyway, one morning I just happened to be carrying a book, and it was about Theodore Roosevelt, and he stopped me and he asked me if I was enjoying it, and I told him that I was, while my knees were banging together.
I bet.
And we stood there for, I don't know, it might have been 15 minutes. It could have been a half hour for all I know. As he talked about Teddy Roosevelt, and he talked a little bit about Winston Churchill. And I related in the book that people have a tendency to view a lot of these folks as cardboard characters.
Yeah.
And he was not what he was made out to be in most corners. He was extremely very nice, very generous with his time, and absolutely fascinating. And I mentioned the fact that I've never met anyone in my life, maybe with the exception of you, Angie, that had the kind of energy that he gave off. And maybe that was because I was just very young, or because he was the most powerful man in the world. But then, I would, after that was over, I would run into President Ford more frequently. We had one in particular funny conversation where I had come in late. The Fords were very generous people. All these folks, and the Nixons too, were very generous, very nice people. And the Fords had thrown a picnic for everybody in September of '74. And I came in late, and I was always looking for food. And so I came in late, and I'm trying to get out the door to grab a hot dog or something. And all of a sudden, here comes the president. And he stopped. He stopped me and he said, "Hi, what's your name?" And I told him, and he asked me what I did, and I told him, and all of that. And so he said, "Well, how do you like, being a messenger and working, as a clerk and all that?" And I said, "Oh, it's fine, pays my college bills." And I looked at him and I said, "So how do you like being president?" He said, "It's not a bad job." He goes, "I don't have a long commute." But that's the kind of people that they were. Very nice, very charming, and most of them, a very good sense of humor. So
They did in that job, yeah.
They should.
I'm sorry?
I say they need to be a good sense of humor in that job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Are there
Absolutely.
any significant political things that you were aware of at that time? I mean, I know Watergate
Well,
was beginning to bubble.
we would tend to learn more from what we read in the Washington Post
Really?
every day than things that happened, 50 feet away. But I was there when the president resigned and when he went out, to wave goodbye from the helicopter. And in fact, my children have seen, I'm in some of the footage, and they laughed because they could never believe that Dad was ever that young.
Yeah, I bet.
But I was around a lot of the people who were involved in it. I was yelled at any number of times by General Haig, who was the White House Chief of Staff.
Yeah.
I was the kind of kid that everybody knew but didn't know who I was, which I think worked in my favor. So what I tried to do with the book was to try to put in the history and personal things about the people who were involved in those days, along with the humor of working there and the silly stuff, because it's just like any other office building. It's just that some of the people there can do some pretty powerful things. So
yeah. Well, now tell me, why did it take you about 45 years to write this book?
I mean, I'm a very slow writer. Yeah, it's 100,000 words, so it was about five words a year. I needed time, and I finally got to the point where I had a little bit more than a year to do it, and I wanted to get it out because of what was happening with the incumbent administration, and that there might be some interest in what had happened with Watergate, although it rather pales in comparison. And so we finally got it done. It was a long labor. I'm working on another book now, and it's those for anybody who's ever written a book. It's a love and something murderous at the same time.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Yeah,
I know.
You do. You in particular know. Yes.
Oh yeah, I'm on my second book, which Ruth is.
I know. I look forward to reading it.
Okay.
So Joanne Grubbs, one of our guests, is saying she's looking forward to reading Don's book, which is called Downstairs at the White House. It's available on Amazon and all fine booksellers. And Don has a copy of it behind him, I see, propped up there.
Oh, I always do. I always carry multiples with me. No, anyway, that was me. The guy who did the cover actually used to work for Mad Magazine, if you remember that. He's a brilliant fellow. And so that was me, really, all those years ago. And you see Nixon and all of those different things. So, but yeah, it's available. It's easiest to get it on Amazon. You can get it, on Kindle or paperback or audiobook, which we also have.
Indeed.
So listen, why don't you tell our viewers your Frank Sinatra story? Go on.
Well,
Go on.
I was a character, and my dad kind of taught me, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So, what's the worst people going to do to you? Eat you? They can't do that. So go ahead and give it a try. Well, one day, again, people were very gracious, and I would get invited to things. And in this case, I was invited to a dress rehearsal for the Prime Minister of Italy. There was going to be a dinner that night, and Frank Sinatra was going to be the entertainment. And so Sinatra was doing a rehearsal in the East Room. And as long as I live, I'll never forget him singing Old Man River, which was enough to bring anybody to tears. And I mean, you could literally feel the floor in the East Room vibrate. But I had ended up with a seat up front because nobody else wanted to sit up front. And as soon as he was done, he asked one of his guys for a glass of water. And being younger and faster, I jumped up and went and poured a glass of water for him. And as I was handing it to him, he sat down on the piano bench. I managed to pour the water down his sock. And he was another very gracious guy. You know, I lived to tell about it. And he said to me, he goes, you know, kid, sometime you ought to come and hang out with me and the guys, you know, out in Vegas. And I believed him. So I remember going back to look up, you know, what it was going to cost to fly to Las Vegas, which in those days was an impossibility.
Yeah, that was exciting, though. Yeah.
We once went to in Palm Springs. We drove past the Sinatra's house, and we're like looking around, trying to just see where they come and go, and where's the back gate, and where's the garage, you know, whatever. And there's a big sign on the gate that says, "Never mind the dog, beware of the owner."
Yeah, as we stopped to try and take a photograph, the gates began to open, so we jumped back in the car quick. But I tell you what, the Beatles had a lovely Frank Sinatra story. There was a time when Brian Epstein said to them, I've got you a ride from Palm Springs back to LA in somebody's private plane. So the boys will pick you up in the morning, get you there, be ready at 5 a.m. So they were all spruced up and ready to go, driven to a little airport, put on this private plane, sat down, buckled up, and Paul looked to the right of him, and the person sitting next to him was Frank Sinatra. And he leaned across the aisle and he said to John Lennon, at the corner of his mouth, "Guess who's sitting next to me, look." And John looked, Jesus, Frank Sinatra. And Paul said,
"It was his plane."
It was his plane. Paul said, "I'll never forgive myself." Talk about foot in mouth. I turned to him and said, "My stepmother will never believe me when I tell her this." And I immediately went, "Oh." He slapped my knee and said, "Don't worry about it, pal. I did the same thing when I sat next to John Wayne years ago." Diffused the moment. So you see, he too was just a guy like other people, like presidents.
That's right.
Yeah. John Lennon was looking daggers at Paul, going, "Did you just say I can't believe I'm sitting next to you?" Because the Beatles would get it all the time. You know, "I can't believe I'm sitting next to John Lennon." Yeah. Paul felt like a right teenager, you know.
You know, Don, you and I go way back to when I worked for USA Today, and I got transferred out to Nashville, to the Tennessee, and after the Northridge earthquake. And you were the big boss then. I never thought that we'd become friends and Facebook and email buddies, but here we are. How the world changes, hey? And tell us about, you went to work in Russia, didn't you? And Poland, helping people set up newspapers.
Yeah, that was, there was a program that had been set up during the Bush administration with the Agency for International Development. And after the wall came down, there was an attempt to send media people over there to try to help them build a free press. Yeah. And a great difficulty because there was no economy to build anything with. But I went there I probably 3 or 4 times over the first few years before I became a corporate suit and couldn't do it anymore. But the people, you know, it's a typical situation. The people, as I'm sure that you and Ruth found them, they were very warm, lovely people. It was the government that was the problem. That's right. And unfortunately, the work that we did, including buying a press for one regional publisher, a woman who wanted to be her own little Gannett in Siberia, and print lots of people. It pretty much went for naught after Putin came in. But the people were absolutely wonderful, and the only contribution that I know that I made was in a meeting in which I was talking about how you could increase pages in the paper and what that would cost, because the government did all of their printing for them. And so there was some math involved in all of this. And one little guy is sitting there and he keeps raising his hand and asking questions. And so I finally said, let me see your paper. And they pass it up. And as it's being passed up, there are laughs that are getting louder and louder as it came up to me. And it turned out to be a porno newspaper. So the only thing I know that I actually did was I did help the pornography industry in Russia. So,
And the crowd goes wild.
very proud about that. But people were really sincere, and I stayed in touch with a lot of them for a long time until the government kind of shut those communications down under Putin. So it's a shame. I don't know what happened to those guys.
We're still in touch with a few friends from those days when Ruth was a pop star in Russia. And in fact, we did one of our Beatles-related shows in, was it New Jersey last December?
Staten Island.
Staten Island last December, one of these behind the Beatles things that we do. And one of our guests was Ruth's translator when she was a pop star in Russia.
Is that right? Small world.
Oh, yeah, and she came to the show, and she actually was wearing a sweater made out of wool that I had sent her all those years ago. I sent her some.
Oh, my goodness.
Would you believe?
Yeah.
Wore a sweater she'd made it out of.
Her name is Savitar Evgerev, and she is half Indian, half Russian. Her father was Indian, her mother was Russian. And
fascinating.
Savitar means sun, and Chandrika, her sister, means moon. And she speaks 7 languages. She's come to America courtesy of George Soros, got herself a law degree, and she does 30 hours a week pro bono for immigrants and, just people with their visa status. She's a wonderful woman. And
that's so fantastic.
Great. Yeah.
Wonderful.
It's so great that she was able to get out of Russia and lend her talents. I mean, she speaks Tamil, Hindi, Russian, Uzbek, Urdu, English, French. She's unbelievable.
I speak 2 languages, English and rubbish.
She speaks 3 languages, actually, Don. She speaks English, rubbish, and happy hour.
Oh, and happy hour.
That's the best language, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, I know.
So what's next for you? What's your next book?
Well, right now I've started a blog that it's called Dodging Career Killers, and it's business advice for younger people. Of course, now to me everybody's looking very young, but about how to avoid the kind of traps that can absolutely ruin your career. So I'm just actually finishing a story about a woman who went through absolute hell with a very nasty boss. These are all true stories, and how she overcame and actually prospered as she fought her way through it. And I have another story about how a boss of mine, actually during a meeting in New York with a client started screaming, and my boss was able to shut him down into silence in it couldn't have taken more than a second. And so there are those kinds of things that, you get into those kinds of problems, and particularly when you're young and you don't know what to do. Well, that's what we're hoping to do with this and to help folks. So we're working on that, and then I'm probably going to put together a business story book, actually, that'll probably pick up, oddly enough, with where I left off downstairs at the White House, because it has to do with taking chances and remembering that they can't eat you.
Fascinating.
Well, that's right. They can't eat you, and unless you've done something wrong, they can't put you in jail. And you just have to follow life's path where it seems to want to lead and make the right decision.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
So now, before we go any further, Don, please tell everybody where they can find you in various forms.
Well, the easiest place is downstairs@thewhitehouse.com.
Great.
Yeah.
And that has all the information and everything about everything. Everything you want to know, and a lot of stuff you wouldn't want to know.
So Dot Vanderway is interested in your book. She's an avid reader. We're getting lots of comments from people all over the world, actually, because that's the thing.
Oh, wonderful.
That's the thing about even though it's American domestic politics, the White House, you know, it's still hopefully that shining beacon on the hill, isn't it?
Yes.
It's what people
We hope.
aspire to.
We hope so.
And the interesting thing to me about this state visit to the United Kingdom, a lot of people are criticizing Her Majesty for, you know, the expense and the drama and the pomp and circumstance. But it's not about the person. It shouldn't be. It's about the office of the presidency and the respect for the United States.
Exactly.
So I'm very glad that, you know, he hasn't gone off script, and Melania is representing us fabulously. And I think it might be in some way, hopefully, it'll be an eye-opener for the Trumps about longevity and dignity and relationships and things like that.
Tradition.
So hopefully it'll work out great.
I hope so.
Yeah,
well,
I do.
I'll see you on the red carpet, Don.
Yeah, right.
Well, thanks so much for coming today.
This has been absolutely delightful.
Still on.
Yeah.
Yeah. But now, normally, I either, you know,
sing.
I either sing or regale or torture our viewers.
Sometimes she strips, but not today.
Well, no, not today. I haven't got my own.
Yeah, she's never stopped, right?
So anyway, I have a few words I'd like to say. So 1, 2, 3. When spending his youth at the White House, it was then a political lighthouse. But now it's all changed. He'd be more than deranged if he still spent his time at that trite house.
Ooh.
That's
something else that almost like White House, but I refrained. I managed to control myself.
She was picking her brains this morning going, what rhymes with white and trite? I'm like, don't even ask.
Thanks again, Don. It's been wonderful.
Absolutely.
Pleasure's all mine. I'm so glad we are able to do this.
Yeah, I am too.
And we will we'll post this and share it. And please, anybody interested in the fun times, the Nixon White House, and this crazy intern when he was 17. What a fabulous man. Thank you for being such a great guest.
Yes.
You guys are wonderful. Thank you so much.
You bet. And we'll check you out at downstairs@thewhitehouse.com.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, kiddo.
Bye-bye.
You have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.